Did your childhood memories actually happen? Think back for a moment. I'm willing to bet you remember something that felt completely real at the time, but now seems totally implausible. Maybe an adult felt impossibly large. Maybe a room felt endless. Maybe an ordinary object felt alive, threatening, or strangely aware of you. This is the world Rugrats depicts so perfectly. Not an exaggerated cartoon version of childhood, but an accurate reconstruction of how the world actually felt before we stepped outside of it. But what if those memories weren't false at all, but were true in a way we've forgotten how to recognize? I'm not saying Rugrats has some secret coded message about psychology, but it does teach us something about ourselves. It shows us that the bizarre world of our childhood held far more truth than what we see today. Rugrats was created by Arlene Klasky, Gabor Kasupo and Paul Germain, and was based on one simple premise. What is the world like from a baby's perspective? This is visually shown in the quirky, exaggerated Klasky-Kasupo art style. Raw, asymmetrical designs that capture the messy, oversized feel of a toddler's point of view. Even the camera angles are low to ground, upward shots with extreme perspective. Watch the first episode, it looks more like a avant-garde art project than a network cartoon. But it's not just the visuals. Each episode's plot follows the overly literal worldview of a toddler. In fact, 80% of episodes hinge on the same trope. An adult says something casually, and the babies take it literally and chaos ensues. Dee Dee says she needs to find her place in the sun. Tommy attempts to literally find her the sun. Or when the adults mention a baby sale, the babies take it literally and try to escape. We usually think of this as misunderstanding, like the babies are getting it comedically wrong. But developmentally, this isn't a false interpretation. Because understanding how their mind works is the first step toward understanding the deeper truth in our childhood memories. If we look at something like Piaget's stages of development, we can see exactly how that mind understands the world. In the pre-operational stage, which best fits the babies in Rugrats, several features show up again and again. Children at this stage don't think in abstract terms. They think concretely and literally. What something looks like matters more than how it actually works. That's why objects in Rugrats so often feel alive. Toys aren't just toys, they're treated as having intentions, moods, agency. This is animism, where objects are experienced as if they have feelings or awareness. Children at this stage are also egocentric, not in a selfish sense, but perceptually. They experience the world from a single perspective. Rugrats constantly plays with this. In the episode Give and Take, Tommy gives a toy to Chucky, yet even though he seems tired of it, he can't quite grasp why giving it away might feel better for someone else. The episode itself revolves around both babies slowly learning that another perspective exists at all. But this doesn't just affect emotions or social understanding. It shapes how children experience space, movement, and agency itself. Piaget noted that young children haven't yet separated self-movement from object movement. Their own motion and the motion of objects belong to the same experiential field. Most of us remember versions of this. Sitting in the backseat of a car, convinced the moon was following you. Rugrats displays the same reasoning on show. In Down the Drain, treating the motion of objects and his own body as part of the same continuous field. Yet, what Piaget describes are developmental limits, ways the child's mind hasn't yet differentiated itself from the world. But other thinkers saw something else in the same state. Not just limitations, but a return to something older. A mode of experience where self and world aren't fully separate. And the strange thing is this. Observing the world in this way allowed children to experience it at a far greater psychological depth, precisely because of how their minds were structured. And to understand that, we have to turn to Carl Jung. Referring to the same stage of development, Carl Jung named the state they were in as participation mystique. a state in which the subject and object are not yet psychologically separate. To put it more clearly, let's use some examples from the show. In Season 2, Episode 10, Reptar on Ice, the babies find what they believe to be Reptar's lost baby and go on a quest to deliver it to him at a live ice show, treating the performance, the costume characters, and the infant they carry as part of the same continuous reality, with no distinction between fictional narrative and the physical world around them. Or Season 3 Episode 11, Mr. Friend, about a creepy clown toy programmed to follow kids and play with them, while repeating the same awkward catchphrases. The gang ironically call it Mr. Fiend, and go on to take the doll as a literal psychotic being that is after them. Now, you may be saying, so what? Kids take things literally, but it's not just that. It reveals the mechanism of how kids think. You see, to an adult, they may find the doll creepy, but their inner psychological reaction will be something like this: that doll makes me feel creepy. It represents a concept of evil I have in my head. But to a kid, there's no "this makes me feel." There is only "doll creepy." The ego has not formed enough for it to be reflected. Instead, the same object they have feelings toward is imbued with having the emotion itself. I.e., it's not my doll fell off the shelf that makes me feel sad. It's the doll fell off the shelf and now they're sad. Kids fuse the effect into the object itself. This is why when you were a kid you may remember a toy feeling sad, happy, personality traits you could only see. But it goes deeper. This may explain partly some of our bizarre memories from the past a little clearer. But what about the part where I said we had a greater access to the deeper parts of our mind? For that, we need to look at Carl Jung's idea of archetypes. If you're watching this video, there's a good chance you've heard the term before, but briefly, archetypes are innate psychological structures inherited by all of humanity. They belong to what Jung called the collective unconscious, which is why the same symbolic patterns appear across cultures and civilizations that never interacted. They often show up as personality patterns: the warrior, the mother, the old trickster. They also appear as recurring motifs and structures. The forbidden forest, the underworld, the journey across the sea, the threshold. These are not invented tropes, they're symbolic forms that the human psyche naturally generates. They are the stuff of myths, formed and dreamt up all the way back to primitive man. But unlike other psychoanalysts of myths like Freud, Jung doesn't see the gods and heroes of these stories as merely analogues of human experience. He sees them as expressions of innate psychological structures already present within us. For early humans, these were not just stories, they were experienced as realities in the world itself. And that's because primitive consciousness had not yet developed a strong, reflective ego. Archetypal patterns rising from the psyche were not recognized as inner phenomena, they were externalized outward. As Jung says, his consciousness is menaced by an almighty unconscious, hence his fear of magical influences, which may cross his path at any moment. And this is where things get interesting. Jung pointed out the similarity of this to children, but Jung infamously did not go into depth around children's psychology. But I think the same thing has happened to us. The world we experienced was infused with the archetypes of the unconscious. And maybe we can use this way of thinking to understand how it applies to children. Because the child's tendency to imbue the effect of an object onto the object itself is also applicable to archetypes. Perhaps when we saw an image, an event, say crawling into a dark basement or a shadowy closet, our mind reacted by imprinting the psychological archetype onto the object. The basement became imbued with the archetypal underworld, mysterious, dangerous, and full of hidden forces just beyond our control. In other words, the world became mythical. The scenarios we see in Rugrats are almost identical at times to scenarios we too had as kids. In Mirrorland, Tommy and Chucky imagine a separate world through an antique mirror. When they enter it, they find the adults behaving in strange but logically explainable ways, but interpreted by the babies as alternate Mirrorland versions of them in the episode. Whether intentional or not, this episode is laden with archetypal experiences kids engage with. The mirror to an alternate world? That's reminiscent of the image of the threshold, a symbolic boundary between the familiar and hidden. The idea of Mirrorland itself is reminiscent of the underworld archetype, a strange, often subterranean world which partly represents the realm of the unconscious. What makes this depiction extraordinarily accurate in what we've described is how mundane the scenario is. There's no need for a new cartoonish world. Instead, the babies imagine it themselves, just like we did in our infancy. We transform the physical world into an external experience of the unconscious. And this isn't just a vivid explanation for what might be happening, because even outside of Jung, developmental psychologists describe states that eerily mirror this experience. Take the developmental psychologist Donald Winnicott. When he observed children at play, he actually compared it to dreaming. He noticed that children enter what he called a potential space, a state we might casually describe as getting in the zone, where the mind spills outward into the physical world. In play, the child takes objects from reality and reshapes them through imagination. A hand becomes a spider, a string becomes its web. Does that sound familiar? It's even been shown that abruptly pulling a child out of play can be disorienting, almost like suddenly waking someone from a dream. And that connection is oddly crucial. For Jung, dreams are one of the primary ways archetypes appear in our lives. It seems like there's another crossover. Again, for children, it seems archetypes are latent in the psyche, come alive through play. These are not abstract symbols but lived experience. Safety is embodied in an all-powerful godlike parent. A cardboard box becomes a shelter or a hidden world. These are not metaphors to the child, but direct encounters with deep psychological forces, experienced through ordinary objects and people. One thing that demonstrates children's natural closeness to archetypes is through Jungian sandplay, a form of therapy developed primarily for children. In sandplay, children are not instructed, analysed, or asked to explain what they're doing. They're simply given a tray of sand and a selection of ordinary objects, and allowed to play freely. What consistently emerges is not random activity, but meaningful arrangement. Children create scenes involving danger and safety, separation and return, conflict and protection. Even as a child, I remember doing something similar. I would build a sandcastle and surround it with repeated circular walls. At the time, it was not symbolic to me, it simply felt right. And I'm sure you have something similar in your memories. Sandplay gives us a glimpse of how little separation exists between children and the unconscious. But all of this points us toward the same conclusion. Our minds at this age worked in a way that brought us into closer proximity with deeper psychic forces. The lack of ego meant the world and the mind became one, each revealing the depths of the other. As mentioned earlier, our minds at this age were not logical devices, they were imagistic. And that is likely why, combined with the intensity of children's emotional responses and the archetypal material present in their experience, that these images remain so vividly remembered. The bizarre, the implausible, feelings that never seem to resurface with the same intensity or frequency as an adult. Though it's important to not idolize this period, since the knowledge of this part of our psyche is only available now upon reflection as an adult. And what it tells us is something important. If we look at the child archetype Jung describes, which isn't akin to the biological stage, but it's one that overlaps symbolically. It represents to us a figure where the unconscious and conscious are bridged, a bridge that has often been burned by the time we become adults. But the child is a symbol where that bridge remains, pointing our current selves toward a journey that leads us to the depths of our own psyche. Maybe some of our memories didn't happen, but they certainly were not false. Thank you for tuning in to another Late Night Noodles episode. If it's your first time here, I hope you enjoyed, and if you want more of this, leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.